Welcome to this segment on establishing a relationship with the aborted child. This process normally comes in step 8, and with all the other steps, you will need to educate your client. In this area, I like to begin by telling the client that there's a normal cycle to life. There's a beginning, a growth period, and an end, a closure. And you can do this again by role play to grasp the concept with the area of a grandmother. Mary, you know, when your grandmother dies, you'll be able to say to yourself, my grandmother had a beginning, she was a baby, she went through adolescence, she got married, she had her own children, she had her grandchildren, and you'll see her death as a full cycle of life, that she had relationships and friends and ups and downs. And when you go to her funeral, you'll be able to participate with support. And you'll be able to say, you know, when you go to work, if I'm kind of sad today, it's because yesterday, well, we buried my grandma. And maybe you'll participate in the memorial, and your part, maybe something simple like, you know, I remember my favorite thing about Grandma was on Sundays, I would go over to her house and we would bake cookies, and she would call me Pumpkin. That was her pet name for me, and I'm really going to miss her. And you would be able to share all of this stuff with other people. You would be able to identify her by name and comment on some of the days that you had with her. But abortion is just the opposite of all of that. There's a beginning, and immediately there's an end. There's no normal cycle to the life process. When you go in to have your abortion, you don't think in terms of accepting the baby as a person. We talked about that earlier. You certainly didn't go back to work and say, you know, if I'm kind of sad, it's because yesterday I participated in an abortion and I lost my child. Everything was kept inward. You never really took the time to feel as a mother and to be able to say, this was my child. And so what we're going to be doing in this particular step, Mary, is allow you to feel those maternal feelings and allow you to accept your child and a relationship, and then bring that relationship to a closure process. To begin with that, I'd like for you as a counselor to start with evaluation of where your client is at in certain areas, particularly in dealing with the child. So turn with me in your manuals to page 14. And on page 14 in the upper left-hand column, there's certain questions that you want to be able to answer about each of your clients. The first one is, how much does my client know about embryo or fetal development? Does she really understand the gestational development of her child, that it was a baby? How much does she know about abortion, what it did to her child during the procedure? What are her spiritual beliefs about life and death? Does she understand there's a separation between soul and spirit and body at the point of death? Does she have a sense of gender to her child? Can she even admit that she aborted a child? All of these are just questions that you want answered by the time you reach step 8, when you begin to establish this relationship. Now, there's some examples on page 14 that you can work through on your own in order to be able to get better at evaluation and to answer those questions with each of your client. Another area that you'll need to look through is matching terms with your client. Turn with me to page 32. Some of this you'll have to work through on your own. We can't possibly cover everything in the videotapes here. When we work with our clients, we want to accept them right where they're at. And one of the ways we can do that is to match terms with them when dealing with the issue of their child. On page 32 and 33, there are 3 areas in which we can match terms in order to be more supportive and more sensitive to our clients. We have to understand that our client has to go through a process that she does on her own, and every client does it individually as far as timing and advancement. And this process begins by first accepting that pregnancy equals baby. Then the client will move to, that means baby equals my baby. My baby was lost through abortion. My baby is now in heaven. Those are the concepts that you want your client to naturally progress to. And you do that by the steps and by evaluating what your client is saying to you. So let's start with using the term baby versus using the term pregnancy. The reason why you don't want to come across verbally as saying baby so much is it can present a judgmental attitude. If your client has not accepted that pregnancy equals baby, and you say to her, but didn't you realize that you were aborting a baby? She will feel like you're judging her, and she will not be where you're at. So you're going to listen to her. In the first 1 or 2 steps, your client is going to say the word pregnancy instead of the word baby. She'll say something like, well, I knew I was pregnant. I didn't want to be pregnant. I was happy to be pregnant at first. And so you're going to match those terms. You're going to say something like, how did you feel when you found out you were pregnant? Something you would not do is say, how did you feel you were going to have a baby? Because she may not be there yet. So you're going to listen to maybe steps 3 or 4 as your client begins to go down the steps and you begin working with her more. You'll hear her say, I didn't know that it was a baby. Or, Jim told me he didn't want to have this baby. The first time that you hear your client say baby, now you have permission to use the term baby. But until you hear her move into that phase that pregnancy equals baby, that meant my baby, you do not necessarily have permission to use that term. Another area is surrounding the death or destruction of her child. Rather than to say that she lost her child or her child was aborted or destroyed, she'll use the term aborted or abortion procedure. She'll say, they aborted me. The abortion was painful. Again, you do not have permission to talk about the loss of the child until she does. So you would say, when did you schedule the abortion procedure? Or can you tell me about the abortion? How did it feel during the procedure? And you would just match her terms. Then later on, in the later steps, you'll hear her say, that's when I felt my baby die and leave my body. Or it's my fault that my baby's dead. Once she has expressed that the baby has been lost, now you have permission to express that or to talk with her matching terms. And the third area to match terms is the separation of the child, its spiritual soul versus its body. You see, many women, particularly those who are non-Christian, have a concept that their baby is still in pain, that their baby is still in a dumpster, that their baby is still being experimented on, that their baby is still in pieces, and they think the body of their child is actually the person, the soul, the spirit. And so you need to evaluate that. You also need to wait for that client to then say, not only is pregnancy baby, my baby lost through abortion, but you're going to wait for her to say, my baby's in heaven, or to ask questions about where is my baby. In the earlier stages, she'll describe the body of her child because she hasn't moved off of that. She'll say something like, when I looked at the jar full of blood, I knew my baby was in there. Now you and I both know that the spirit and soul of her child was not in the blood filled with jar. But allow her to work through that, and you don't need to express that at that point in time. Just wait. She may say something like, when I saw my baby, it was a little boy and he was all burnt from the salt solution. Later on, as she moves into the final phase, she'll ask, where is my baby now? Do you think he is in heaven? Or she may say, is my baby still in pain, or is it still in the garbage? These questions then, or these statements, then allow you to see that the client is moving into the final phase of separating the body from the soul spirit. In order to aid in this area, there is a handout which is given to the client at the end of session 2 or 3 in step 3. And she goes home. It's a 5-minute Bible study on the separation between soul and spirit and body at the point of death, that the soul and spirit are separated and then go to heaven, and that the body is left to turn to ashes and dust. Also, it talks about, from our point of view, we believe that babies that are aborted are then received into heaven. Now, I must be honest with you, I wouldn't get into a debate about this. I don't think there's any particular scripture we can say babies that are aborted go to heaven. But I do feel, and it's written in the study, that we can look at the life of Christ and his response to children on earth, and also the nature of God in his fair judgment. And so we tell women who come into our office for counseling that their child is in heaven, and to thank God for receiving them. If you want to change that in your particular religious belief, then I think you should counsel with your church leadership or pastor. I'd like to then go ahead and move on to a baby packet that we also do in helping to establish this relationship. And that's found on page 56 in our training manuals. This baby packet is offered at the end of step 7, which was forgiveness. And I want to share with you, a lot of professional counselors kind of flex a lot in their counseling. They find my outline and steps a little too constricting. But I honestly believe that it's better for the woman if she works through her grief and her anger and establishes forgiveness before she comes to her child. And I compare this with the time of a natural delivery. When we deliver our living children, our kids, we weren't angry and we weren't unresolved and we weren't going through grief. At the time of delivery, our children were placed on our stomachs and given to us, and it was a joyful time. It was a time of establishing that visual relationship and beginning something that was new and fresh. And that's how I like my clients to come to their children. So I really like to keep establishing the relationship with the child in step 8. So this woman comes to her baby as a fresh, clean person. She's not still angry and dealing with all this unresolved grief. So at the end of the forgiveness phase, I'll share with her, here is a baby packet that I would like you to make up. And what we're going to do is give you 9 items to choose from. You can do all 9, or you can maybe just do 2 out of the 9. And on the bottom of page 6, you can read all of them. But I'll just cover a few here. The first one would be, I'd like you to find a picture of a baby that you feel represents your child. Now, sometimes women who have had multiple abortions will, I feel that they need to make up a separate baby packet for each of those abortions. But in addition to that, they may really find a picture that they like that has 3 children in it. So if they bring that, you don't have to get picky, let them do that. It may be a picture of a baby they don't know, just something in a magazine. But often, about 50% of the time, it's a picture of a family member, either a niece or a nephew, or even a brother and sister when they were younger. They'll bring that in. You can also let them choose to write down a name or 2 of a child. I just had a client who took, calligraphy, and she wrote very beautifully and in a nice design and pattern the names of her children. She spent like an hour on 2 names, just really printing out their names very nicely and making it very colorful. Clients really get into these baby packets. It's just a real happy time for them. They can buy a card that would be given to a mother at a baby shower, place a poem, or something that would be given at a baby dedication or christening. And then I challenge them to write a few words down, something that they would say to their child during the process of birth or maybe a few days later at home, something that they would like to say to their child. Then we go into buying an article for their child. This can be something simple, a bootie or sock, a bib, pacifier, a hair bow. And they can buy this item in either pink or blue or maybe something neutral, white. And most women have a sense of gender. Even men have a sense of gender for their children. Now, not everybody will do this. I particularly did not feel any type of sense of gender, and I didn't name my children. I feel very complete with that. So don't force people to do this. Just simply let them choose. The other items that you would need to do is to then get into closure. Buy a sympathy card that would be mailed or given to a friend who lost their baby. Write a poem or find a song, some words that would be read or sung at a memorial service. And then finally, write a small note to your child, something that you would say at the time of a stillbirth or a neonatal death, maybe a miscarriage. And when they do that, I like to give them at least 2 weeks to do that baby pack it up. And also something that we've done this last year is not given people a manila envelope like it says in the manual, but we've asked them, if you'd like, go out and buy a real pretty bag. They have such beautiful bags now for gifts at gift shops. And a lot of women have really liked that, to go out and buy just a special baby bag and put these items in it. And then what we do, at the end of 2 weeks, we schedule for them to come in. And during this reality phase of accepting their child and giving the child to God, I like to begin by reading Jeremiah 29, and it says, "For I know the thoughts and plans that I have for you, says the Lord, thoughts of plans of peace and welfare, and not for evil, to give you hope in your final outcome." And as we began to share, the client begins to share with me these items one by one, the cards, the poems, where she found them, why this particular card meant a lot to her, the baby item that she bought and why she bought it, a little bonnet for a little girl. All of these things began to bond her and to allow her for the first time to say, I am a mother. I am the mother of a child who's lost, but for the first time I can freely feel like I'm the mother of this child. And Proverbs 30, starting with verse 15b, it says, there are 4 things that are never satisfied. The first is the desert. No matter how much water you give it, it keeps wanting more. The second is the fire. No matter how much fuel we give it, it's never satisfied. The third is the grave. No matter how many people die, the grave still wants more and more bodies. And the fourth that says that is never satisfied is the empty womb. And it's specifically talking about the woman who's infertile, who's unable to bear children. But that so applies to the woman who's had an abortion, that she goes on with her life trying to replace this child, this empty womb. And so establishing the relationship with this child then gives her a peace and satisfaction. We close this session with prayer, thanking God for receiving her child, and then moving on to talking about our National Mom's Day, MOM, Memorial of Mourning, where we set up permanent markers across the country that are dedicated to women and the grief that comes after abortion. And our brochures and materials are available for that. So thank you for listening to this section, and I believe we only have one more cassette. Welcome to this segment, the very last one, titled Going On with Life. Of course, this chapter and this area would be dealt with in the last step, step 9. And we're going to cover the specifics of that evening. If I have a client that's married or has a fiancé or a minor, I will always ask them to bring in their husband, their parent, or their fiancé into the last session. And I will begin to educate that parent or that particular spouse in the area of post-abortion syndrome, abortion connectors, and make them become familiar in the area of the program and counseling that we've been going through over the last few weeks. The first thing I would like to talk about as we think in terms of going on with our life is the area of recovery. And I believe, as we mentioned earlier, the layering process, just taking one loss at a time and one bit of reality and working through that, that recovery does not truly come at the end of this program. That we go on and we remember the exercises, we remember how to find abortion connectors, how to relinquish the spiritual anger, and to get involved in pro-life activity. And through the process of continuing these exercises that we have learned in the program, then recovery begins to actually become stronger in our life. Also, I don't think it's any discredit to our faith or to our God personally, as we say that abortion has sinned, abortion is sin, and that sin has scarred our life. I feel that to say God heals every wound and we go through this program and go into the land of utopia is maybe even a form of denial. We have lost our children, and that is enough to continuously look back and say, you know, I'm sorry that I lost those children. And there can always be a sense of remorse there. And so don't be too hard on yourself if you feel like you've either gone through this program or you have a client that's gone through the program that still needs to work in some areas. I believe that's kind of a natural process. We want to be able to see what we've achieved, and you'll be able to see a lot of the pain and anger leave your client's life, and you'll see that first beginning in the commitment of forgiveness, and you'll see them establish a relationship with the child, and there's a lot of good things. But during the 9th step, you'll come to a place where we share concerns with our client. And these concerns are just discoveries that you have come across in counseling with your client. Perhaps you found out through the process of intake that your client is addicted to drugs or is a victim of incest, something in her past. Maybe her abortion or her pregnancy, which ended in abortion, was a result of rape. Whatever her particular background is, you may discover, and that would be considered an area of concern, and you would need to refer that client for that particular counseling need. Another area of concern may be that you didn't really work through one particular area very well or to see it completed, such as anger. Maybe your client is a person who had a physical complication from the abortion. A hysterectomy may have occurred. And through that anger process, you felt, you know, we really didn't work through anger in a completed way with the area of hysterectomy. And I kind of have a sense, Mary, that there's still, that pain and anger there. And I just want you to be aware of that, because I have a concern, that that's still real raw and it's still very fresh to you. And so just kind of be aware of that. You may want to share with your client who's just getting married that sexual intimacy could probably be a problem as you go on in your marriage. It is quite often. We dealt with it very specifically in the manual, and haven't really dealt with it in the videotapes, but you may share with them the problems that most commonly occur in sexual intimacy and in marriage. Anything that you feel, chronic depression, passive-aggressive behaviors, things that you picked up, we share in this last step. And then we move on to tools for continued healing. And those are found on page 62 in your training manual if you'd like to follow along. The first tool is to ask the client to go over things that she likes about herself or things that other people like about her, and even make a list of those things. You may have her read this list and even add a few yourself. You may share something like, I really like the way you express yourself, or I enjoy the way you always look put together, or I like the sound of your voice, or I like the way that you are, a friend to me. Whatever your particular likes about your client are, you would share with her. Another tool is to challenge your client to stay in a positive environment. If your client is a cocktail waitress, you may want to express to her that's probably not a real healthy or an environment that would build her esteem, and to maybe get a new job or seek new employment. If she is in a good position where people are building her esteem and feeding her esteem, then you may encourage her to stay there. Tool number 3 is to always strive to encourage herself and strengthen herself. When she achieves a goal, to write it down. It may be she's writing a poem, or she's a person who cannot make a decision as to what area of the house to clean first. Maybe just that day she's able to clean the kitchen. To write that goal down. Today, my goal was to clean the kitchen and I achieved that goal. Anything to help get rid of that self-hatred and to begin building the esteem. Tool number 4 is we like people to carry a small notebook that we call a thank you journal, and every day she's to log or enter something that she's grateful for. Maybe something happened, maybe it's something that she discovered about herself, maybe there was something, maybe a phone call or a visitation by somebody, whatever she's grateful for. Tool number 5 is we like our clients to be in the Bible daily, to read a portion of Scripture, and to maintain their prayer life. Tool number 6 is to continue using the program that they were taught. Again, the abortion connectors, to keep identifying their anger, to continually releasing their anger, and to always read post-abortion material. Perhaps you can lend them some of your books, and there's a library in your manual that is suggested reading. And the last tool that takes a little bit of time to work through is to select an outreach program that she can continually release her spiritual anger and to become involved in the pro-life movement. Now, you can begin, let's turn back with an evaluation on page 15 in your intake section. We can begin by looking at our client and first beginning to see how stable she is. How far along has she come in her healing? Some of your clients, even after the 9th step, will still be pretty raw, and they'll be even still in grief, and they won't be able to have the strength that they need to maybe go on television and give their testimony. So that would be one area that you'll need to evaluate before putting them into the pro-life activity. A second area that needs to be part of the evaluation process is in the area of their future and their family. How much time does she have to put into pro-life activity? What are her specific goals and plans? How vocal does she want to be? Is she, the concerns about her family, is she married, is she single, does she have parents? What does her church and pastor think? How involved in the pro-life activities does she want to become? For example, if your client says, I don't think I should ever tell my parents about the abortion, it would just destroy my family. The evaluation would be, it's not time to put her on radio and television, okay? So you'll need to just really find out how stable she is, what her goals are, how does her family react to this. If she has a husband and maybe no children, and her husband says, look, if you want to share your testimony, I'll be glad to support you, and we have a little bit of money I can help contribute, then you have a lot more to offer her in the way of choice in working in the pro-life movement. So let's go back to page 62. Actually, page 63. And I want for you to separate in your mind 2 categories. The first category is the woman who wants to become involved in pro-life but does not want to reveal that she's had an abortion. And on page 63, we give you an entire list of activity in the pro-life movement that she could become a part of, and not necessarily other people know that she's aborted. The second list on page 63, she would need to reveal that she is a woman who's had an abortion, and that would be one-on-one counseling in post-abortion or abortion recovery, to be a victim in our National Mom's Day, our Memorial of Mourning, and 3, to share her testimony. I'd like to talk a little bit about sharing the testimony because I feel it's such a vital way of recovery. As people begin to stand up, I'd like to see them in very supportive environments, maybe in a church setting, a pro-life setting, where they would share their testimony with people who would be very supportive to them. and then later on maybe move into press conferences and, media events, rallies, and so forth. I do feel that as they continually express their pain and their anguish from their abortion, that it's a chance to release a lot of that pain that's still in there. And we have seen across the country, as women participate in rallies and Operation Rescue events, that they're able to then offer themselves to others who are coming forward and saying, I can identify with you. I've had an abortion and I need help. So it's not only an opportunity to relinquish the pain that's left, but it's an open door to bring people who need healing to us. So I really encourage people to share their testimony and take part of the pro-life movement. At the end of chapter 9, then you can begin to work out the restoration problems, and then at the end of the session, I like to close in prayer, and the parent or the spouse that came with them is also included in that. And this completes our abortion recovery training. Welcome to Section 7. Joining me today is Beverly Hadlin from Toronto, Canada, and her organization is Straight Talk. In their office, they deal with chastity and abortion recovery. And she's been helping distribute our training manuals, as well as counseling hundreds of victims in Canada each year. And we're going to do a segment where we're going to ask common questions and try and answer them that generally come up in a question and answer format. So Beverly, why don't you go ahead and begin, and we'll see what happens here.
Okay. I guess one of the biggest questions that seems to be asked after a girl has gone through a lot of healing is, how do I tell my parents? Do I tell anyone? What do I do now with this knowledge?
That is a common question. I know that many of my clients get to a point where they feel either it will help relieve their pain, or they're about to go public with their abortion. And I would, as a counselor, try and help them to research that within themselves and to ask good questions that would allow the answers to surface for themselves. So my client isn't saying, what do you think, Nola? She's asking herself, is it the right time? And if a client is saying to you, if I tell my mom, I'll feel better, as you ask her, Mary, why do you want to tell your mom? Because I'll feel better. Then that's probably not a good time. Although you, the counselor, wouldn't say, this isn't a good time. You would say, how would you feel better if your mom knew about your abortion? Oh, I don't know. It's something between us. And she kind of rambles on. Maybe it's time to help her continue working through her program. But if she says, the reason why I want to tell my mother is because my mother was always a good mom, and she has felt guilty for years because after my abortion, I began taking drugs and alcohol, and my mother has always kind of wondered what she did as a parent that failed or caused problems. So I want to show her that she was a good mother, and that the reason I began to take drugs and alcohol was due to the abortion, and explain it that way. Then that might be a good reason and may help in the bonding process and the restoration process. But if it's just to make the client feel better, generally that's not always a good reason to tell your parents.
What about a parent telling their children that they've had an abortion? How does that work?
If I have a mom, I usually recommend that she really process, particularly if she's married, with her husband. And that's usually a good sounding board because it's another person who knows the children. And if they're small children and the woman is going to go public, we have to remember that her children have lost a brother or sister, and they too are going to come down with grief and anger. I think the most difficult time in my life was walking into the bedroom I have a little boy and a little girl, the bedroom of my children, and sitting there on their beds, they were discussing that mom had aborted their brothers and sisters and what made mommy do that. And it was very painful. And this is something you need to be honest with your clients about. if they want to go public with their abortion, then they're going to have to tell their children. But they're going to be aware of the fact that their children are going to go through grief and loss, and they will need to be asking their children questions. How do you feel about the fact that I told you yesterday that I experienced abortion? Another point that I like to make is that when we tell our children, we need to explain that we did not walk in there with a baby and say, here, kill this baby. Really explain the choice system well, that we did not know at the time of the abortion what that meant, that we had no other solutions, no alternatives, and explain very detailed about the grief and the loss that we feel, how we would never do that again, how we were exploited and were under a misconception. And this helps children. Children begin to see mom as a victim, not so much as a perpetrator. And I think that's also a big help. And if the children are young, I would say pay closer attention. If they're older, they're in their 20s, well then, just kind of keep in touch with their feelings. One of the things that I see most often is just the fear of, will my children reject me after learning of my abortion? And your children may do that, reject you for a little while. But as you begin to work out that grief and anger, they can then be restored. And also, let them participate in the outreach programs. As we explained earlier, that the woman who's in recovery begins to get involved in the pro-life movement. And my children pick it with me. My children sidewalk counsel with me. They go to rallies with me. And I truly believe it is going to be our children, those of us who are victims to the abortion industry, that will stand up in future years and say, we cannot, hopefully, legalize abortion again, or we must stop abortion, because I lost a brother and sister, and I believe this is their therapy just like it has been for us.
Very good. It's a little different for me because I'm single, so when I made the decision to go public, I really only had to worry about myself. So it certainly takes a lot of courage, and you really have to consider husband and children. When I travel across the country and I speak in audiences where not everyone has had an abortion, there's usually at least a dozen or so, but there'll be women or men that come up who know someone who's had an abortion, and they say, well, I know so-and-so, what can I do for them?
Wanting to help and wanting to aid and make them all better.
That's right.
Very commonly, people who suggest that have to ask themselves, answer themselves one of two questions. Does Mary, my friend, know that I know about her abortion, or does Mary totally have this confidential and I found out about it? If Mary knows that you know about her abortion, that makes it easy, because then we can just simply say, here's the testimony of someone who's gone through the abortion road like you have. Why don't you read that? And if you'd like to talk about your abortion, I want to make myself available to you. Or, I've been studying about abortion recovery, and I feel real bad about women who've gone through abortion, and if there's anything I can help you with, I'd like you to have this reading material, go through it, and if there's any questions or any pain that you'd like to talk about, I'm available to you. And give people reading material. Education is the first step to a woman's recovery. People who have abortion do not understand that they're suffering. They don't understand that they're hurting, more than likely, or they would have already come to you. But if you can let them say to themselves, it's okay to feel pain, it's okay to be in touch with this grief, and to express that, then you can usually open a door to that. If a person is totally confidential, you may be able to mail them something unanimously or confidentially, not put an address or name. If not, then I think you just need to pray for that person and an opportunity to open up. I don't feel that we have a right to intrude on someone's private life and private feelings. If they're still in denial, then we need to just help them and let God open that avenue up.
It's interesting because you've had 2 abortions and I also experienced 2 abortions, and I do get women and men coming up after, how could you do it twice?
Yeah.
Why are there's so many, they're saying, that are going 30 and 40% will be repeat aborters.
Yes.
What's going on there that we're multiple abortions?
Well, the last study that I read from Stanley Henshaw indicated that it was well over 40%. Today's abortions were on women who had already had abortions. Some of them in the study were up in the 5th and 7th abortion. Some women in the study had had 22 abortions. I believe it's a combination. First of all, again, any woman who's had an abortion, one, hates herself and is in a mode of self-victimization. And in that, she is going to submit herself to abortion time and time again because it is so painful, both emotionally and physically, that this is a way of punishment. The second item is that maybe she's in a state of denial, compensatory denial, where she's constantly in sexual involvement, and pregnancy is simply a result of her denial. And the third is that if on the second pregnancy I say, oh, I have to keep this pregnancy because it's a baby, then I have to be willing to say, I'm ready to go through the pain from this abortion because it was a baby too. But more commonly what happens is, I'm not ready to deal with that pain. That's too painful to deal with the abortion. So, therefore, this is nothing. This is the contents of the uterus, and let's get rid of it. And so I feel those are 3 reasons that contribute to that. In counseling multiple abortions with the STEP program, you merely just take each abortion as it comes in her story. So we deal with the pre-pregnant woman, the pregnancy, how did you get pregnant? Then how did you come to that decision to have an abortion, the abortion, then the accommodation stage. How did you incorporate this abortion into your life? During the accommodation stage, she'll come up with the second pregnancy. Now you're back into step 2. How did you find out you were pregnant? How did you make that decision? And you just keep repeating those first 6 steps, or first 5 steps. Then when you deal with anger, you deal with all of your villains. When you deal with forgiveness, you forgive people from all 3 abortions. When you do your baby packets, each baby will have its own packet. And then you know, go ahead and complete the program.
Right. We're seeing more, at least I've experienced, and I'm sure you have, more men seem to be surfacing with post-abortion syndrome. What do you find are the differences between men and women?
It is interesting, and I contribute men coming forward to the fact that we women are including and claiming their feelings. We found out 10 years ago, as women like ourselves began to stand up, more women came forward. So we as women, we need to remember to include men in our testimony and say, you know, I know that fathers here are hurting from their abortion experience. What I'm finding as a result of men coming forward in therapy is that men who did not want the abortion to happen, maybe even kind of neutral, should I say no or it's her choice, are very angry. They're angry over the fact that they have no rights. They're not recognized as men or fathers. They're frustrated with not having their hands tied, not being able to do anything. And they bring that anger over into marriage or in other relationships, even on the job, when people outside of their opinion make decisions about their life. So if wife says, well, I decided to buy this without my opinion, you know, see, it reminds them, it's a connector, it reminds them of the abortion experience. I was not a process of the decision making, I had no rights. Men are very angry, more so than women who have abortions. The other one is guilt. And I believe this is from the way men are made naturally. They are protectors. Men are defenders. They go to war. They protect their family. They beat up the burglar. We go protect the kids. And to not be able to protect their child the way they know they should have. Many men will say something like, I knew that if I only called Mary's name, that she would have turned around and come back. I knew if only I had been more assertive and said, no, we're keeping this baby, I'll marry you, or no, my parents will take the child, that she would not have gone through that abortion. So they're feeling more guilt than women that I'm counseling.
Right. The program that we're using is based on biblical principles. A lot of the people that we counsel come out of the church or
Yes.
Christian community. But what about the non-Christian?
I like to see the program. I use it on non-Christian, but just to kind of role play with you, I say something like, well, Joanne, you know you're not a Christian, and that's fine. I am. And the program that I use is a Christian-based program, but I'm not going to shove the Bible down your throat or make you feel bad because you're not a Christian. I'm very glad that you came to me for help. But I want you to know that we will reach a certain point in the program where you'll need to make a decision about how you feel about Christian concepts. And I'll let you make that decision on your own. And you can take as much time, months if you'd like. But I just want to be honest with you and be upfront with you that we do have a Christian program. And when you get to anger, you'll have to decide what you want to do with that. And then just kind of stop at that. And then when I get to anger, then she has to make a decision. At that point in time, in the 6th step, I present the gospel to her and let her decide. Because I sincerely feel that abortion recovery, total recovery, is absolutely impossible outside of the Christian belief. I believe that Jesus Christ is the forgiver. And unless you understand that and unless you experience that, you cannot forgive a person for taking your baby's life. It's just impossible with our own strength or inward ability. So whatever your idea of recovery is, to those of you who are watching this tape, you have to decide that for yourself. Well, we can certainly improve a woman's lifestyle, but we cannot, I don't think, totally give her recovery until she meets the Lord. And use it on all the non-Christians, but just be upfront with them and let them know where you are as a counselor.
Very good. Sometimes when I, speak in different churches, I find that pastors and leaders are afraid to touch the subject of abortion.
Oh, no, really?
Because they know that there's people in their congregation who've had abortions. So how does someone who wants to get their church active, what are some gracious ways and tactics or manners of approaching their congregation about abortion without hurting the ones that are sitting there probably very wounded?
Yes. We have this happen on Sanctity of Human Life Sunday, and in the Catholic Church it's Respect Life Sunday. I would suggest that you contact either Straight Talk if you're in Canada or Victims of Choice Office if you're in the United States. We have a brochure titled Pastor, She's Sitting in Your Church. And it deals with that issue. Pastors who say, I can't talk about abortion because we have people sitting in our church who've had abortions. Well, they're men of God. They need to talk about sin. They talk about lying. They talk about adultery, all of these things. And abortion is certainly the sin of our age. And what we do is rather than just say abortion is murder, we say abortion is wrong because it destroys the life of an innocent child and destroys the parents with it. If you are in our church today and you have suffered an abortion or gone through an abortion experience, we as a church want to restore you and bring you into the church. And that's why it's so important that they offer abortion recovery in their local church or refer your number or another number where women in their congregation can get good help, can go for recovery.
Good. In the therapy model that you've developed, which I think is excellent.
Thank you.
I'm using it too. But there is comments that have, come from different areas, particularly when dealing with anger and imagining the person is there and focusing on that person and then giving the anger to God. Sometimes, I guess, different camps have said, well, that's sort of guided imagery or, getting into visualization or what have you. What would you say? What's your response to them? Is that what it is?
I don't use any type of advanced guided imagery, and I don't take people back to black pits or any of that. But I feel that as we pray for our missionaries, some people put their missionary picture on their refrigerator, that we naturally, as visual people with eyes, when we pray for our pastor and his family, we picture in our mind. And as we're in therapy and we're praying to God for forgiveness for this abortionist, for our mother, to just kind of help cement that in a concrete way, I ask my clients, just in your mind's eye, picture your mother's face as she took you to the clinic that day, or picture your mother's face and really make a commitment to Christ to forgive your mother. And so I don't like to get into any type of hokey-pokey stuff myself. I think we really need a caution for that. Certainly that statement is in our statement of faith in the manual. Guided imagery can be taken too far. But I do believe that to just picture with our mind's eye these people we're forgiving is a good thing. I think it's very helpful.
Good. I think the first time I sit with a client, of course they look into my eyes and they see healing, but their biggest question is, am I really going to get over this? Can I ever get over this pain?
Yes. That's in my testimony. The top 4 questions, one of them is, will I ever recover? Will I get over the pain? And I've been working on my own recovery for 7.5 years. And I would say I have recovered from the guilt, from the shame, all of the, I would say, initial feelings. I am still sorry for what I have done, and I believe that comes just with penance, with turning from what we know is wrong and right. And I believe that, yes, we can recover from the guilt and shame and the heartache that causes grief. But yet, there's a part of us that we know that will always miss our children. And I say that's why God stays away from sin.
Right, but there is hope and healing, and that's a beautiful thing.
Yes.
Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed this.
Well, thank you. We hope that you contact our offices and we can make ourselves available to you. Beverly, I appreciate the work you're doing in Toronto.
Yeah, and you too in the South. Boy.
Thanks.